A few weeks ago, Turkey's political map was redrawn after Oust Erdoğan was ousted as leader of Turkey's main opposition party, the Republican People's Party or CHP. Soon after, Özal announced he was forming his own new party called, seemingly for lack of inspiration, the New Party or Yeni. It's a big deal for Turkey because, for well over 2 decades, the CHP had been Turkey's main opposition party. But the new party put an end to that, becoming the second largest party in the country after Erdoğan's ruling Justice and Development Party or AKP, and even leading in recent polls. So in this video, we're going to take a look at this new party and what it means for the country's opposition, before assessing whether the new party could actually put an end to Erdoğan's 2-decade-long grip on power. Is Trump on a political crash course? Is his war in Iran unwinnable? Well, we don't know. That's why we interviewed The Economist Washington bureau chief Shashank Joshi in the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long. That's just one of the articles in our longest issue ever. Subscribe to get your copy by clicking the link in the description. So to understand how we got here, let's first look at how the split in the CHP came about. Before deciding to form his new party on the 24th of July, Özal had been the CHP's leader since 2023. He was largely seen as the driving force behind the CHP's rejuvenation. Under his leadership, the CHP managed to beat Erdoğan's ruling AKP in local elections in March 2024 for the first time in 22 years, maintaining or gaining control of city councils in several major cities, including Istanbul. Istanbul CHP Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, who claimed a second victory in the 2024 local elections, solidified his position as a real challenger to Erdoğan. But he's been swept up in a wave of crackdowns that have seen several mayors, including himself, arrested on accusations of corruption and fraud. İmamoğlu was detained just days before the CHP primary that formally confirmed him as the opposition party's presidential candidate for the next election. The move was widely seen as politically motivated by critics and human rights organisations, and it sparked mass protests across the country. So, Turkey's opposition party had already been facing a string of legal problems, but things got worse for the CHP in May this year, when a court stripped Özal of his title as chairman and reinstated the party's former, unpopular leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Kılıçdaroğlu was famous for leading the party into a string of defeats over the years, including, most recently, his loss to Erdoğan in the 2023 presidential race. It's hard not to see Erdoğan's fingerprints all over this story, as many human rights organisations have denounced the president's weaponisation of the justice system against the opposition. On top of that, in February of this year, Erdoğan appointed as his new justice minister the Istanbul chief prosecutor that was behind the crackdown on the CHP that we just mentioned. Anyway, after Özal was ousted from the opposition party's leadership in May, he announced the formation of his own party, the New Party, 2 months later. That on its own wouldn't necessarily have altered the country's political map in any meaningful way. After all, splintered parties are nothing new in Turkey's history. What amounts to a huge shift in the country's political map is the number of members of parliament who decided to join the New Party, effectively leaving the CHP a shell of itself. Of the CHP's 135 members, 90 followed Özal's call for party members to join his new party, leaving the CHP with just 44 seats in parliament and reducing it to the 5th largest party in Turkey. Even İmamoğlu, the popular jailed Istanbul mayor we mentioned previously, announced last week that he was resigning from the CHP after 17 years to join the new party. Furthermore, the CHP's standing in the polls has dropped pretty dramatically. The CHP went from around 35% before May to below 5% today. The new party, meanwhile, took the CHP's place as the second biggest party in parliament, and polls well above 30% in several different surveys. So, what does this mean for the country's 2028 elections? First, it's worth noting that, technically, presidential term limits would bar Erdoğan from running again once he completes his current term in 2028. But he could legally seek another term if Parliament calls an early election, which is what many experts believe will happen. So let's assume Erdoğan is in the race. Does this new party actually stand a chance? Well, at first glance, a divided opposition isn't always the best thing. If opposition votes are split, it obviously becomes harder for the opposition to mount a real challenge, potentially making things easier for Erdoğan. To fight that, Özal's new party will really need to differentiate itself from the CHP, inheriting more than just the secular social democratic base it already seems to have, and build a wider coalition that includes parts of the centre-right, as well as some nationalists and Kurds. That could prove tricky given Erdogan's recent efforts to formalise a peace process with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, an outlawed militant group that's been fighting against the Turkish state for decades. The move could potentially draw the pro-Kurdish DEM party away from the broader opposition bloc and divide it even further. And finally, given Turkey's political landscape in recent years, it's hard not to imagine a scenario in which new party leaders suffer a fate similar to that of those in the CHP who posed a serious threat to Erdogan. For now, Özal has managed to avoid the fate of imprisonment that many in the CHP have faced, thanks to his parliamentary immunity. But even that is under threat. A couple of weeks ago, Turkish prosecutors asked Parliament to lift Özal's immunity over allegations that he accepted bribes on multiple occasions, barely 2 weeks after he announced the formation of his new party. That said, if the new party manages to avoid serious crackdowns, we think it actually stands a good chance of winning elections. Erdogan has not left the economy in good shape, especially in the wake of the crackdowns on political opponents, which spooked investors. Looking ahead, the Turkish economy faces considerable headwinds, particularly given the country's reliance on fossil fuel imports. In May, the central bank raised this year's inflation target from 16% to 24%. The stock market plunged 6% after Özal was ousted from the CHP leadership, and the lira continued its slide against the dollar. It wouldn't be the first time a party has broken away from the CHP and gone on to win an election. The Democratic Party, for example, split from the CHP in 1946 and came to power 4 years later. As we mentioned previously, Özal is seen as the leader who managed to revive the CHP after its disappointing performance in 2023, so that momentum could serve the new party well should it face Erdogan's AKP in upcoming elections. And even if the new party does face a crackdown, much like the CHP did, Turkish history suggests that isn't necessarily fatal. After all, Erdogan himself rose to power in the 1990s as mayor of Istanbul, before being jailed by a government that felt threatened by his popularity. Erdogan still became prime minister in 2003, and 2 decades later, he's still here. I've already told you about one of the articles in the next issue of Too Long, but there's so much more inside you're going to want to discover. So if you subscribe using code SUMMER26, you'll not only get 20% off every issue as a subscriber, you'll also get an additional £3 off your first issue, bringing the cost as low as £4.99 for a digital edition. And yes, if shipping, or increasingly tariffs, are making deliveries to wherever you live a little too expensive, you can get a digital version sent straight to your inbox. Plus, we actually earn more from digital editions, as we actually lose money on shipping, so it's also a better way to support the channel. This is a good first issue to jump on board with too. It's our longest ever at 84 pages, and it contains stories from all across the world, including Burnham here in Britain, the wars in Ukraine and Iran, China and the US's relationship, a bit from the Vatican, and of course the cover story on the plan to rebuild Europe. It also contains articles from our superb new writers Natasha, Isaac and Ebba. So make sure to use code SUMMER26 at checkout and become a Too Long subscriber today.